it's a really exciting session, and it's a chance to bring two iconic figures in our industry together, Chris Viehbacher and Alex Gorsky. Chris will be leading a fireside chat with Alex, and I have the pleasure now of introducing Chris, with whom I used to work at Sanofi. Chris is a giant in the biopharmaceutical industry. He's currently the founding CEO and chair of Gurnet Point Capital. Chris is playing around with $2 billion of money from the Bertarelli family, investing it in life sciences companies, and has just been doing a terrific job. Chris continues also to be a leader in our field. He's peripatetic. He's everywhere. He and his wife Allison are great supporters of the arts, the Boston Ballet, the Boston Symphony Orchestra, and really just an amazing individual who every one of us knows and requires no introduction. So, Chris, with that, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Andy. Good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to welcome Alex Gorsky. You know, Alex is only the 7th person to hold the chair and chief executive officer title at J&J. He was appointed in April of 2012 as CEO, and then chair in December of 2012. And he recently has transitioned to executive chair, passing the CEO baton on to Joaquin Duato. So Alex, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, Chris, thank you very much for having me. I look forward to the discussion.
So Alex, you know, the last 2 years have just been dominated by the pandemic, and I have great admiration and respect for you and J&J, because J&J stepped up, looked at this global health problem and actually invested at risk. Nobody knew whether there was going to be a market or not. And J&J stepped up where a lot of more traditional and bigger players in vaccines did not. And so maybe you can tell us a little bit about, you know, how did you come to that decision, and what was it like from J&J's perspective about how the pandemic unfolded, how the whole vaccine market developed? And, you know, obviously there's been some wrong-minded efforts to try to hold back patents. So maybe you could just share some of those thoughts, because, as I say, I really thank J&J for all that you've done on fighting the pandemic.
Sure, Chris. Well, again, thank you very much. And, you know, just let me say at the outset, I couldn't be more proud of the biopharmaceutical industry and the really remarkable impact that the scientists who literally were working 24/7, 365 over not only the last several years, but over the last several decades made for the world at this very important moment. I think, you know, two and a half years in to the pandemic, sometimes we lose sight of that. You know, where we were not that long ago with so much uncertainty and, frankly, fear. Some might even argue a lack of political, economic, social security around the world. And while we still need to make more progress, and we're certainly not through this, a tremendous amount of work and I think breakthroughs have been accomplished in that time. But, you know, let me just start a little bit. If I go back to the beginning, you know, Chris, as you know, we were really not a vaccine company several years ago. In fact, when I stepped into the role as CEO and had the good fortune to partner with Dr. Paul Stoffels and Dr. Bill Haidt and others as we were, you know, looking at the future of our pharmaceutical group, it was a bit of an aspiration and the vision that we had for the company at the time to say, look, how could we move beyond treating disease to actually helping to eliminate it? And it was out of that vision and that we decided that we needed to better understand vaccines. And as is often the case in pharma, we looked around our portfolio and not having those internal capabilities. We went outside. We ended up purchasing Crucell that we brought inside that happened to have an adenovirus platform that in a number of different platforms, actually, many of which really did not work. And we ended up, you know, going through the development process and actually financially, we wrote a good portion of it down. Again, as often the case when we take risk in the biopharmaceutical industry. But the good news was that there was one particular platform, the Ad26, that we began experimenting with in areas of infectious disease such as Ebola, and a few other areas where it did in fact work. And as a result, we deployed it in Africa in a couple of select cases. And it was the work that we did there. And as we all know, vaccines can be a very nascent science. But as soon as our scientists, saw some of this genomic sequencing information coming out of China related to COVID-19, they quickly, decided to beg for forgiveness rather than ask for permission, put together a few constructs, and literally within a matter of weeks, felt that they could have a platform that could be applicable in this very unique situation. From there, things ramped up very quickly, of course, with taking it through the development process with animal models, scale up. We knew that it was a very ambitious undertaking. Never in the world's history had we gone from zero to literally billions of doses in a very short period of time. We tried to collaborate, obviously, with regulators, the FDA and the EU, but also with a number of other companies. And again, I was really proud the way the industry worked together with the FDA, with the CDC, with so many WHO, so many other organizations. And of course, then finally getting to the point where it could be deployed. And again, we experienced many twists and turns as we went through it. But again, I think collectively, if we look at what was done through mRNA or through our platform, the fact that we were able to reach so many people and make such a difference, again, I think is quite remarkable.
It really is. And mRNA vaccines have worked well, but not everybody, they're not really for everybody and for all countries. So it was really important that we had another platform. And again, really appreciate you stepping up. Having been in vaccines a lot myself at GSK and Sanofi, I know how hard the vaccine business is, and that makes the achievement of you and the team just that much more important. Maybe just switching gears a little bit, for any CEO of a pharmaceutical company, and, it's hard to really understand that role in that until you've actually sat in that chair. But one of the biggest concerns you always have as a CEO is, how do I keep growth in my pipeline? How do I keep innovation in my pipeline? And, when you became CEO, I think it's fair to say that Janssen had stalled a little bit on its pipeline. And today, I have to say, as a peer in the industry, I think, what J&J has done and Janssen has done on its pipeline is terrific. So have you got any thoughts, insights that you could share with some other people who are thinking about how, maybe they've already got a great pipeline, how do I keep that going? Or I don't have a great pipeline, and how do I start that? But what was that journey like for you?
Well, you're right, Chris. Here too, again, I'm very proud of the work that our organization has done over the last 11 years. When I was stepping into the role, I think our pharmaceutical business at the time was probably about a $28 billion business, and we had just lost about $4 or $5 billion to patent expiry. We had the launch of biosimilars ahead around Remicade. And it was at that time when some of our leaders, again, Paul Stoffels, Joaquin Duato, Jennifer Talbert, Bill Hite, and others, really focused on a couple of factors. I think one was a recommitment to innovation. We realized that, the clearest path forward was for us to bring great therapeutics to the market that really made a difference in people's lives. And while it sounds like a common objective for the industry, actually bringing that to life, as you know, and as many on this Zoom know, is quite a challenge. And so then it became an issue of, okay, how do we get there? And I think one of the most important decisions we made was that ultimately to go for the very best science, regardless of the genesis of that particular technology. And we had a real commitment to be agnostic, whether it was going to be sourced internally and externally. So often what you see in the pharma industry is we have these insidious internal arguments, about what we're going to do with what we have in our hands versus really saying, oh, wait a minute, what's ultimately going to help patients, healthcare systems the most? So that was the first step. Number two, it was trying to get a focus in areas where we felt we could really make a difference. And I think as is often the case in our industry, to do well, you need to have deep capabilities and expertise. And that can't be spread like peanut butter on a sandwich. Rather, it needs to be done in a very disciplined, thoughtful way. And at that time, what's I think quite interesting is I believe we had one compound in our oncology portfolio, about a $400 million product, Velcade. And of course, today, we're arguably one of the very best oncology portfolios in the industry. And so, but again, that was done through building the science, collecting the scientists who could bring that to life, licensing in a number of great compounds, building a number internally, and then, of course, pairing that with really strong commercial reimbursement capabilities that allowed us to take these platforms and really globalize them at scale in the ensuing years. And that's really the formula that the team has tried to follow. And as a result, whether it's in oncology, immunology, infectious disease, cardiovascular, neuroscience, I think the track record really speaks for itself.
So is that why that's led you to double down now on innovation? You've announced that you're going to spin out the consumer business, a business that's made J&J a household name. When I was trying to develop a strategy for turning around Sanofi, I actually looked at J&J, and when I did a 30-year analysis of the stock market, actually J&J always had a premium to everybody else in the industry that was deemed to be part of the diversified portfolio. Now, of course, science has moved on and Janssen has moved on, and you're still going to be diversified with devices and vaccines, I know, but how are you looking at kind of the focus on pharmaceutical innovation versus a more diversified model?
Look, Chris, I think there's at least two-part answer. I think, one, for innovation to be successful, in addition to having the right, I think, objective philosophy, the right scientists and commitment, it does take resources. And, I'm really proud of the fact that if you look at Johnson & Johnson, last year we invested over $14.5 billion in research and development across the portfolio, which puts us among the top 5 companies in the United States, among the top 10 in the world. Now, I'm also an advocate of if some is good, more is not necessarily better. There needs to be accountability, there needs to be responsibility. And I think, look, all of us as leaders in research and development and innovation-based industry know, sometimes there needs to be a careful balance between resources and the actual outcomes that you would, intend and that you track to achieve. But I think that's one aspect. Two, we have always, for literally over 130 years, been wed to an idea of a diversified portfolio. And we do that because we've tried to be pragmatic rather than what I'd call dogmatic, and really try to follow the science. And J&J was founded actually as a surgical gauze company. And then it went into consumer, obviously, with things like Band-Aids, baby powder, baby shampoo, a number of other areas. It wasn't until about the late 1950s, early 1960s that Johnson & Johnson became interested in pharmaceuticals. And we found through different periods, science, innovation, technology took different turns. And what we did is we tried to follow where that technology was going to really lead our portfolio. We didn't enter it with a mindset of we're going to be a third and a third and a third. Rather, we said, let's see where the real underlying patient and consumer need is. Let's see how we can match that with the best science and technology at the time, and come up with what we felt was the best long-term sustainable formula for growth so that we could support that kind of innovation. And what we've seen over the last several decades, we believe, is some divergence between what we were observing in the pharmaceutical segment and the medical technology segment versus the consumer segment. And what do I mean by that? I think, one, it relates to the clinical development and the regulatory requirements. So whether you're talking PMA, BLA, 510K, associated with our pharma and medtech business, The standards are very clear, they're very rigorous, and tend to be predicated upon a higher level of science and technology. And what we've seen in the consumer space, while decades ago, clearly with brands like Tylenol, and even in our baby portfolio and dermatology portfolio, we've created a lot of science. We've seen the consumer side drift more and more towards what we would say more of a focus on advertising, social media, and other means to expand brands rather than some of the underlying science. Two, we found that the business model, especially in pharmaceuticals and our medical device business, is more of what I'd say is a B2B model, where you obviously work with healthcare systems, providers, hospitals, and others as intermediaries. We're more and more, because of, for example, online shopping, you're seeing the consumer be more of a B2C type model that requires just fundamentally different capabilities and skill sets. And so as we added all that up, we just came to the conclusion, and let me just add one other fact. A lot of people don't realize, and Chris, you hit the nail on the head when you said most people do know us for our consumer brands at Johnson & Johnson. When you think of us, you think of Band-Aids, and I would say sometimes people actually can smell baby shampoo when you say the name Johnson & Johnson. But what they don't realize is that in terms of our sales, that had dropped to about 14% of our revenues for the company, and even a lower percentage of our income. And as a result of that, of course, when you got into portfolio discussions and trade-offs and decisions, it became more and more difficult for those opportunities to rise to the top. So as part of an effort to really free up the business, to be more agile, to be able to distribute capital, perhaps in even more flexible ways, and to be even more competitive, we felt that by spinning it out, being its own entity, would allow that dynamic to take place. And of course, that's when we announced the process, and that's what we're going through as we speak. We remain committed to ensuring consumer needs are met, and we know they'll play an important role in healthcare. But we think this format, where we'll continue to have a pharmaceutical business and a medical device business, by the way, where we do feel going forward there could be synergistic opportunities. For example, in cancer, by taking both a device as well as a therapeutic approach could be quite interesting. That having an independent consumer business and model will provide the best overall opportunity, not only for that business, but for our shareholders and employees and other stakeholders as well.
Yeah, I think all that makes a lot of sense, Alex. I have to say, if I were doing it again, I'd probably follow the path that you're going down too. I think there is that your statement about mindset is really critical. I mean, you have to be so passionate about the patient and so excited about all the science that we're going to hear about today. So, it makes an awful lot of sense. But let's maybe hear from a few other questions. If I could turn to Daphne Zohar, is the CEO of PureTech. Daphne, I think you might want to ask a question.
Yes, hi, Alex, and hi, Chris. This is a great discussion. So one of the things that J&J has done really well is connecting with the innovation community in academia, on the venture capital side, and in biotech. For example, your innovation centers and people like Michal Preminger, everybody in Boston knows her. Also the J Labs. What I know a lot of people in the biopharma industry are focused on is what is going to happen with regard to M&A, because that's such a big driver of the investor interest in biotech, especially from generalists and others. So I was wondering, we hear different perspectives on M&A. We hear that pharma companies are waiting for companies to get more cheap, which I don't think is the case. But what is your perspective on innovation, and how focused is J&J on M&A transactions going forward?
Well, Daphne, I think it's a great question. And look, I think it fundamentally starts with a belief in our industry and our company that ultimately it's about the very best innovation and the very best science, regardless of where it comes from. And I think all of us have got to admit that none of us have got a lock on the very best science and technology in any one particular area. And so to keep an open mind, and to maintain the abilities and the firepower, so to speak, to be able to source that, on a really consistent basis, we think is critical. And if you look at Johnson & Johnson over the last 10 years, I think we did almost $100 billion in M&A and licensing during that time. And it was about a 50-50 split between internal and external sourcing. And we think that's about right over the long term. There may be times when that ebbs and flows in a certain direction based upon valuations or how challenging a particular technology or science is in an area. But I think it's also important to realize that if you don't have enough internal capabilities to know what good is, it's hard to be successful as well. So I think it's a balance that you need to maintain. Two, we just felt it was really important to be part of helping to build that greater ecosystem. Hence, that's how we started the ideas of J-Labs and the innovation centers, of how could we be more proximal to some of the very best scientific minds in areas like Boston, San Francisco, Israel, the UK, other areas around the world. Ultimately, partnerships, relationships, take time, take effort, take energy, and it's difficult to do that virtually on a long-term basis, I believe. And so that's why we invested in those centers. We realized that many of those would not work out the way they intended, but we felt that if we were there, again, on a long-term, more consistent basis, not only was that going to give us greater insights, but hopefully would make us the partner of choice. And we believe it's been a major contributor to our success. Now, as we look forward, it's an interesting time. I mean, if you think, if I remember the facts correctly, there's almost 200 IPOs in biotech last year, and I want to say about 185 of them are under their IPO pricing, and almost 120 of them, if you just added what they have on their balance sheets, are under that right now. I think there's a bit of a disconnect between the long-term value of what they have in terms of science and technology. I think it has to do with likely concerns about the broader market. I think pharmaceutical pricing certainly play into that. But ultimately, I remain a realistic optimist. I think that there's, again, if you just think about what's going on in whether it's gene therapies, cell-based therapies, CAR T, proteins, RNA, so many of these new things right now that we're going to see significant transformation going forward. And in fact, I think this is probably an opportunistic time for many companies. And I think if there's, a silver lining, is that it may force the biotech industry and large pharma to think about different kinds of collaborations going forward. I think the current model where every single biotechnology company perhaps has a vision of becoming a large pharma company and has to take on the cost, the infrastructure, frankly, just isn't sustainable. And I also, and so by perhaps working together in different, more collaborative ways, not only around discovery and development, but even around manufacturing and even on the commercial side, I think could lead to maybe even more innovation and greater access and greater opportunities for the ecosystem and investment going forward.
Good. Thanks, Daphne. See, my very good friend Kieran was under Shaw. Kieran, can I turn the mic over to you?
Thanks, Chris. Hi, Alex.
Hi, Karen.
Hi. The phrase resilient supply chains has suddenly become the most used word today after the pandemic. And as you know, global supply chains are badly disrupted, not just because of the pandemic, but also because of geopolitical issues. We've seen manufacturing disrupted, clinical trials disrupted, and a host of other, biotech activities disrupted. And I just wondered, based in India, I was just wondering, Alex, whether you'd like to comment on whether India can be considered as one of those important, supply chain hubs that could actually prevent some of this disruption.
Karen, great question. And my short answer is absolutely yes. I do think India can play a very important role. Let me back up for just a moment. Look, I think all of us have to admit that over the last several decades, the pharmaceutical industry, but more importantly, I think all industry has been maniacally focused on the concept of effectiveness and efficiency. And I think one might even argue to an extreme, that at times led to supply chains that frankly had limited options and not the kind of optionality, resiliency that's necessary. So again, now I think coming out of the pandemic, there are different mindsets. To your point, I think one of the potentially negative outcomes is taking a more nationalistic approach. And while there are some, clearly there have been risks, and others might even argue there have been winners and losers in terms of truly having a globally integrated supply chain. For many consumers, and it's hard to argue that it's literally brought billions of people around the world out of poverty. And so there have been tremendous effects or positive effects on a global basis, but that doesn't mean there has been significant pain in particular countries or regions as you've seen jobs and technology shift. And it's my hope that maybe this combination of dynamics that we've seen over the last few years will allow the pendulum to swing back into a slightly better rhythm where we have a better focus, for example, on resiliency and redundancy, to your point. And that doesn't mean doing away completely with globalization, again, because I believe there's a lot of positive benefits, but it may mean multi-sourcing. It may mean spreading those capabilities a bit broader that I think can not only be better economically, could be better for the environment, could be better in a number of different ways for the world economy. And back to your point, I think India could be a key part of that, whether it's API manufacturing. Look, even some of the newer therapeutics that I mentioned earlier, these are incredibly complex technologies. And I think all of us will have to understand that it's highly unlikely that every company will be able to build that internally. It's highly unlikely that because the capital would be required, it's highly unlikely that you're going to find enough of the competencies to be able to hire those people. And so again, thinking about new models, thinking about more globally integrated systems and platforms that can not only help us address being able to bring these products to market, but perhaps even improving overall access and perhaps even providing a bit more redundancy in the time of the next pandemic so that we are better prepared, I think is a big opportunity for the industry.
Thanks. I think we got time for one more question and turn to Osaze Udibala from Takeda.
Hey, Osaze, good to see you.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks, Chris. Thank you all. This has been truly enlightening as a conversation. So thank you for your responses. I wanted to switch gears, really quickly. This is a question that's geared more towards participants who are earlier on in their careers. So, you've had, long and illustrious career. Knowing what you know now, kind of looking back over your career, if you were to start from the very beginning, right now, what big problems would you, seek to tackle? What things would you seek to learn?
Yeah, look, Osaze, great question. And, a couple of things. One is, it's clear that much of the science that we're seeing now is actually being unlocked by the tremendous progress that we're seeing around data science, informatics, and those kind of capabilities. And I think every leader in the industry going forward is going to have an even better understanding and appreciation for how those can impact not only the science and technology, and for example, what we were talking about earlier, whether it's gene therapy or somebody needs other, they fundamentally would not be possible if we didn't have the right kind of data science and technology abilities to bring that data science and information together. But that also could be said for what we're doing in manufacturing. It could be said for what we're doing in access. And so making sure that we build those skill sets into our organizations at a very fundamental level, I think is more important than ever. Two, I think as an industry, keeping our eyes focused on access for the world. Look, we've made some tremendous developments in the developed world. When you think about, again, some of these new advancements that we're seeing. And I think making sure that we're also challenging ourselves to say, how are we going to ensure access for the developing world, where literally in terms of numbers of patients who can be impacted, where there's need in healthcare systems, are going to be more important than ever. And last but not least, I think this idea of partnership and collaboration. You know, I must say that, you know, while clearly through decades growing up in the pharmaceutical industry, there's always a certain sense of urgency and accountability and responsibility that's built through competition. And I think competition is healthy for the industry and for all of us. I also really saw the power of partnership and collaboration as we accelerated the development of the COVID-19 vaccines. And when I think of the number of calls that we had with fellow CEOs and, you know, heads of the, you know, various research and development departments, the literally weekly Zooms that were being held across all the companies, let alone the CDC, FDA, EU, and other regulators, and how information was shared real time, and how that contributed to that acceleration and made it possible on a global basis to get done was quite remarkable. So I'd like to think that there are lessons there that in an appropriate pro-competitive way, we can continue to really make a difference for humankind, let alone for our industry and healthcare around the world.
That sounds great. We have just actually tying on the last part of that, we have a question from the audience. This is from Charles Ma at Thermo Fisher. With the supply chain challenges you just commented on, what do you think the CDMO industry can do to improve supply chain reliability and reduce the cost? And I'm guessing that during the vaccine production, you actually showed that you didn't actually have to have everything in-house to produce a vaccine. I think you did an awful lot of partnerships and collaboration on that, didn't you, Alex? Maybe you can comment on that further.
Sure. You know, look, Charles, I think it's a big opportunity. You know, as I mentioned earlier, there's no doubt about it that some of these newer technologies are just significantly different than the traditional small molecule or even large molecules that you know, we've been able to scale internally for decades. And I think given the challenge of some of those sciences, given the capital that's going to be required, I think the only way that the industry is going to be successful is with a right kind of network. And I think that's going to present real opportunities for, you know, external manufacturers, large, mid-sized pharma, and even governments in terms of public-private partnerships to work in, again, new, really innovative ways versus what we have traditionally done, where we tended to, you know, want it to be done all in-house or with just one single partner. So I'm actually bullish on that part of the industry going forward.
Well, one of my best friends is Andy Plump, who is leading this, and I want to keep friends with him. So I think the best way I can do that is finish on time, Andy. So I'll just say, Alex, thank you so much for spending the time with us. Your leadership and tenure has been exemplary and is a real example to a lot of the younger executives rising up. And it's been great to see you and great to hear from you. So we really appreciate you being with us today.
Well, Chris, thank you very much. I've always considered you a close colleague and a great partner and frankly, a role model through your great career. Andy, thank you for the invitation and allowing me the opportunity to participate. And I wish all of you a great rest of the program. And thanks for what you continue to do in a really important industry and platform for the world. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
That's what a great panel. Thank you, Alex. Thank you very much, Chris. And Chris, our friendship endures. So thank you very much for keeping on time. And I was really pleased, Alex, that you brought up some of the collaborative work that was done during the pandemic. Certainly Mathai Mamen, who's the head of R&D at Janssen, was a huge leader, an outspoken advocate for data sharing and for many of the pieces that can be done pre-competitively in our industry. So thank you very much for bringing that up.